Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, let me thank Susan, the President, my good friend David Edwards, the new Secretary General, the Executive Board, and all of the delegates, friends, and colleagues for inviting me to represent UNESCO and personally to deliver an address at this plenary. It's a real pleasure having attended the last Congress in Ottawa, so I hope this is not my last one and I am invited again. But I think when I was asked to speak on advancing the profession, I was really glad that was the chosen topic, because given all we've heard over the past few days and the developments over the last few years, I think it is a critical issue for teachers worldwide and for Education International and teacher unions in every country across the globe. Before I go on to speak a little bit of why I think it's so important and what and how we can advance the profession, I hope you can indulge me a little while I talk about something that has consumed my life for the last few years, and that is to situate this question of advancing the profession within our promise to transform the world through the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will speak a little bit about the SDGs in general, but also specifically about SDG 4 and education for all, and connect that to the question of advancing the profession. First, you may have heard that we've had 2 weeks in New York just these past couple of weeks with the high-level political forum to review the SDGs. Somebody made a comment while I was in New York last week that this forum was neither political nor of a high level, and perhaps many will agree with that. And I think it's relevant in some ways, although it was said quite flippantly, because the key issue is that in reviewing the goals that we've set for us collectively to deliver on the promise to all of the world, is that it is a political exercise, and I think we need to come back to that. And I just want to recall some of the things I heard over the last couple of days, and in particular, the threat we face from reactionary right-wing movements and governments that are now in place in the most powerful countries of the world, and why it is so important that we advance the profession to challenge those who would take us back instead of moving us forward. So let me say, firstly, one of the things that was constantly echoed during the high-level political forum in New York was that we are not delivering on the promise. We are not on track in terms of reaching not only SDG 4, but across all 17 goals. And I think the important message that came from the high-level review was, even though we may not agree with all of it, was that we are not on track, not just in low-income or middle-income countries, but we are not on track across the world. Even those high-income countries where there is progress, they are not on track in terms of all the SDGs, and I would say why. Firstly, I think on current trends, we know that 220 million children and youth will still be excluded from school in 2030. And 1 in 3 young people will not complete secondary education. Furthermore, despite progress in many countries are still far from achieving parity, gender parity and parity for the most excluded, whether they're excluded on the basis of socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, language, disability. We can go on and on of the list of criteria where people are excluded. A second message that constantly was echoed in New York was that we have a learning crisis. I may agree somewhat with that, but I would cast it differently. I think we have to be guarded when we look at the term learning crisis. Often it can be a means to point fingers, and in particular to point the blame on teachers. I would rather say we have an education crisis, and an education crisis driven by the lack of true political commitment and greater investment in education. And most importantly, it's a crisis fueled by lack of attention to addressing the root causes of inequality. So let me go back to why it is important for us to address the issue of advancing the profession. In some ways, to different degrees, every education system is failing to deal adequately with the challenge of inequality and the 2030 Agenda's commitment to leave no one behind. I think it is imperative and urgent that we focus on inclusion, equity, and quality in all countries, low, middle, and high income. It should be remembered that there can be no equality without quality, and no quality without equality. Therefore, in advancing equality in and through education, we must concurrently increase our focus on the quality of education opportunities, processes, and outcomes, and get away from this focus alone on so-called learning outcomes, and learning outcomes that are often narrowly defined within the context of the so-called learning crisis. I think we need to look at outcomes much more broadly, and to look at that education is neither equitable nor effective when students not only fail to acquire the basic competencies in reading and mathematics, but more importantly, when students are not prepared for life in an interconnected world, one that is ever-changing, and one where students need to be equipped with the life skills to think critically, to work collaboratively, to respect diversity, and to develop mindsets to protect our planet and promote peace and social justice. To respond to this dual challenge of equity and quality, we need better policies, better data, and better financing, because not only is education a right, but it is the most cost-effective investment for a more inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable future. But these three areas of better policies, better data, and better financing are not enough. One key component is missing in that prioritization, and that component is teachers and their representatives, their unions. Without an emphasis on teachers as the leaders and developers of what we need to do to ensure that we not only transform education, but that education truly becomes the tool for transformation in society. We've all had this before, constantly, and I think even this morning, and we all believe in it sincerely, that education is the foundation and the key to delivering on all of the SDGs. And I think nobody can doubt that. But again, I think we have to go further and say that not only just education, but quality education. And quality education, the one component that makes all the difference to quality education is teachers. Without acknowledgement of that fact, no matter what we promise in terms of education cannot be delivered. So there are many reasons why we need teachers to achieve not only SDG 4, but all of the SDGs. I would put it much more simply, though, to state that we really need teachers because the quality of an education system can exceed neither the quality of its teachers nor the quality of its teaching. So the fundamental way that we can ensure that education truly delivers on the promise of a transformed world is by ensuring that teachers are at the center of the process of transformation. So let me expand on this a little in terms of why I believe that this truism pertains today and in the future. There are 4 reasons that I would like to refer to in terms of further justifying why we need to pay greater attention to advancing teaching and teachers and their professional status. The first is good education equals economic and social empowerment, and in turn is critical for equity. For every additional year of education that a child achieves, their individual earning will increase by 10%. This is hugely important for ending poverty, SDG 1, achieving zero hunger, SDG 2, securing decent work for all, SDG 8, and reducing inequality, SDG 10, and for peace and justice. All of these goals which were reviewed during the HLPF the past 2 weeks. But I would add further, teachers are perhaps the most important factor to achieving a good education, meaning a valued teacher means a more prosperous and peaceful future for all. The second point why we need to advance the profession relates to the health of all people across the world. Better educated children and adults equals a healthier life. Quality education is a key part of living a healthy life, from reducing infant mortality to improving knowledge about diseases to reducing the likelihood of early motherhood. Education can make a huge impact on an individual's and community's health. Here again, I think it's important to stress that the health of a community and of individuals is not alone the responsibility and due to health professionals. Healthy communities and healthy individuals are as much dependent on good, well-supported, and valued teachers. Thirdly, there was a lot of discussion earlier this morning in the resolution relating to innovation. And I think this is also where we need to look at the role of advancing the profession in relation to technology and innovation. I think it is extremely important that by advancing the profession, we can make sure that we put a human face to innovation and technology in education. Clearly, for many of the challenges that we face with regard to climate change, with regard to life on land, with regard to issues with relation to the ocean, whatever we speak of, given what we have today, we do have to recognize that potentially innovation and technology can offer some solutions. However, we have to recognize that technology is purely a tool to help us advance some of the issues related to solving some of the global challenges we face. However, only with a quality education delivered by an inspiring and supported teacher will individuals and communities be able to realize the potential that technology could offer, and at the same time to ensure that the potential disruption and negative effects of such technologies can be countered. The fourth point I'd like to make, and this is something perhaps that I've already implied, is that the future starts in the classroom and with teachers. A key message of all the SDGs, and in particular of SDG 17 on partnership, is the need to share the message of the Sustainable Development Goals. We all must work together to achieve the future our children and youth and adults deserve. Teachers are key in spreading the word about the SDGs, sharing their message in classrooms, and empowering young people to be active, engaged, democratic citizens. We need teachers because everyone needs the SDGs. If we want the future dreamed by world leaders and young and old in every part of our world, then we need to start in the classroom. We need to start with students, and we need to start with their teachers. So I think I've made the case of why we need to advance the profession. Now let me say a few words on some of the actions we need to take. The first, I was quite, I think, happy this morning with the resolution on the standards. I think it's critical, and I want to perhaps reflect a little on the adoption in a way by linking to the question of what it means to be a profession. While there have been different conceptualizations of the characteristics of a profession, A distinguished operating principle of a profession is that those who are in it should define the key terms of the profession. In a review of teaching as a profession, Thorpe identified about 10 criteria for which a profession has to meet to be called a profession. And I think the first and fundamental criteria is that if teaching is to be a profession, then teachers have to define the terms of the profession. Without that, we cannot call ourselves a profession. So that's the first point I want to make. So what are some of these terms that have to be met to be called a profession? The first is what a person has to know and be able to do to begin formal preparation, how aspiring practitioners are prepared and who prepares them, how they are mediated into the workforce through induction and novice years, what the trajectory of development is beyond the novice phase, what practitioners must know and be able to do at the accomplished level, how practitioners demonstrate when they have reached that level, what the industry standards for success are, what the expected code of behavior is for people in the professional, how people are removed from the profession if they do not measure up, and how changes are made with the advent of new learning and new tools. Any assessment of teaching against these terms reveal that across the world, we are not faring well in terms of being regarded as a profession, because teachers are not, and their unions and their representatives are not involved authentically in defining these conditions, whether it comes to how they are prepared, whether it comes to their ongoing professional development, whether there are discussions on accountability, whether there are discussions on the conditions of service. In far too many countries, teachers and their unions are not at the center of those developments. And until that happens globally, we cannot be regarded truly as a profession. So the big challenge to advance teaching as a profession is to ensure that we define the terms of what it means to be a profession. So noting these criteria, and while there are a myriad of actions that could be taken to advance the profession, I want to perhaps, given the interest of time, to focus on 4 key actions for collective action. The first, at the system level, there must be a shared understanding of what is necessary to ensure that all learners are taught by valued teachers and served by effective teaching. Signaling that the country is focused on teaching and learning, corresponding policy actions must include measures to attract good candidates to teaching through competitive pay structures, incentives, and conditions of service, and raising the status of teachers, equitable deployment policies, and building appropriate professional development and support structures. The process to reach such shared understanding and to develop and implement effective policies must fully involve those responsible for implementing them, namely teachers and their representatives. As we know from this morning, a concrete manifestation of such a shared understanding is the development of a set of professional standards that are constructed together by teachers with all of the stakeholders that matter. Secondly, we need to reorient initial teacher education and continuous professional development programs to respond to the challenging classroom conditions and future demands, both within the classroom and outside. In many countries, pre- and ongoing professional development programs need to be more sensitive to the fact that many teachers will need new skills to confront the uncertain future that we face. Professional development must therefore prepare teachers to identify learning needs, address equity considerations, and be able to implement a variety of appropriate teaching and learning strategies, and provide feedback focused on improving outcomes. 3, we have to recognize the need for more effective and participatory education leadership. For many countries, preparing education and school leaders has been a low priority for too long. Mechanisms are lacking to develop education leaders at school and system level who can inspire, set high expectations, and ensure education systems value and support teachers. Governments working with teachers and their representatives must create a generation of education leaders to provide mentoring and professional support to teachers, promote communities of practice and collaboration at all levels of the system, and ensure that we engage with parents and communities much more authentically. Fourth, there needs to be sufficient investment in education to bridge the financing gap and to ensure that there are necessary resources for long-term and recurrent expenditures for teacher salaries and incentives, as well as non-salary expenses. For many countries, salaries will need to converge to the long-term trend of those countries that pay teachers properly. In addition to expanded investments, governments will need to allocate sufficient funds to make teaching and learning activities effective, including for research, innovation, and making sure that teachers are both practitioners at the level of the classroom, but also policy decision makers. In conclusion, let me stress, to advance teaching as a profession will require all stakeholders, educators and their unions, governments, civil society, and others to coalesce around action. Such a coalition is more important today than ever before in an environment that promotes standardization at the expense of quality and equality, and one in which many believe teachers do work that anyone can do. They can be replaced by technology, and that we need to teacher-proof schools as demonstrated in the expanding privatization of schooling. The only way we can combat such threats is by advancing the profession and doing together with the union and our representatives at the center of such efforts. Thank you.